Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brian Talisayan. I'm just kidding. I'm borrowing Brian's Zoom for today. But I am Amanda Martinez. I am the Training Program Manager for Mental Health America of Hawaii. And for today, we have our Managing Complex Emotions in a Complex World, utilizing self-care to address anxiety and stress. So our goal, as I'm sure you can tell from the title, is really to learn a little bit more about how to take care of or manage increasing feelings of anxiety and stress. If you've attended any of our brown bags before, I'm sure this is old news, but I encourage interaction. So please feel free to ask any questions or make any comments on any of the slides we'll be going through for today. I like to keep the chat box open during our entire time together. We are in webinar format, so you do not have the ability to turn on your camera or unmute yourself, but again, you can utilize that chat box if you would like to interact or ask a question. I am anticipating leaving some time at the end for any questions that may pop up. But again, please feel free to drop them in the chat as they come up organically if you prefer that way. We will also make these slides available and this recording available to all of you in the follow-up email. So don't worry too much about scrambling to take notes or take screenshots of the slides. So you will have access to all of this in that follow-up email. So a little bit of an overview of our objectives. We're going to take a look at a snapshot of the landscape, really of the past couple of years, not just COVID-19, and how that has kind of shaped mental health. Specifically here in Hawaii. We're also going to explore the different kinds of impacts that we know that stress and anxiety can have on our bodies, and how do we recognize that impact within ourselves, right? How do we do that check-in within ourselves and figure out kind of where we're at in different ranges? Then we're going to talk about the different aspects that make up practicing self-care and be able to identify different coping skills that really are going to help us manage that increasing stress and anxiety. And of course, it's always important to know the different kinds of resources that are available. Right, so a little bit of a snapshot of how the past couple of years has had an impact on mental health. As I'm sure you're familiar with any kind of research, it's always being conducted and things are always being updated and being made available, but this does kind of give us a snapshot into that landscape. Nationwide, we have seen an overall increase in experiences of anxiety, of depression, of thoughts of suicide, of substance use, really kind of across the board. And for those who were already experiencing mental health challenges prior to the past few years, we also saw an increase in the severity of their symptoms as well. We also have been keeping our eye on rates of suicidality here in the state. Before the pandemic, about every other day someone does die by suicide here in Hawaii. That has kind of stayed pretty stable over the past few years, at least from the research that we have been keeping up to date on and has been made available. Mental Health America as a national organization also comes out with the State of Mental Health in America report pretty much every year. So their most recently made available report is from 2023, which really kind of captures data from the previous year, so 2022. And what they found was almost 18% of Hawaii residents live with a serious mental health condition. And of that, about 18%, almost 70% did not receive any treatment. And I think that's pretty reflective of the types of help-seeking behaviors that we often see, not just in the United States, but even here in Hawaii as well. But I do think that, there is some hopeful aspects to this, is that if we can say anything out of the past 2 years to come out of that, is that there has been a lot more awareness being shown on mental health. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so happy Mental Health Awareness Month. The more conversations that we have about mental health, the more awareness we can raise and encourage help-seeking behaviors, and the more we can break through that barrier of stigma, right? And stigma really makes it hard for people to kind of reach out for help if they are struggling. So we want people to reach out if they do need that extra help and support, because there's a lot of resources that are out there. Here's a chart that shows the top causes for fatal injuries. So across the top, we have the different age groups. On the left-hand side, we have the different rankings. So as we can see, suicide is one of the top causes for fatal injuries, kind of across the board, but especially so for ages 16 to about 44. And anytime I look at graphs like these or charts like these, it can be quite concerning to see that suicide is so high up there. But again, we want to look for those hopeful aspects, right? So what I want you to take away from this chart is that not everyone who thinks about suicide, not everyone who makes a plan, not even everyone who attempts suicide actually dies by suicide. So what that tells us is that there are a lot of opportunities for us to help, right? And for us to practice prevention. We know prevention does work. For example, if we think of motor vehicle accidents, the yellow boxes on this graph here, we've seen deaths related to motor vehicle accidents decreasing over the past couple of decades, mainly because of the vast amount of prevention efforts that have gone into preventing them, right? Creating safer vehicles, establishing laws and policies requiring seatbelts and airbags, raising awareness about drunk driving and distracted driving. And we've seen those prevention efforts be effective. So I really do think if we could put the same amount of effort into suicide prevention, we would also see a change in these numbers here. And there are a lot of really great suicide prevention efforts that are happening across the state. So just know that that good work is being done. Here is a graph that provides an overview of different kinds of risk factors that we may be seeing or be able to identify across multiple settings. So I know it seems kind of busy, it might be a little blurry even on the slide itself, but I'll explain it to you in a way that makes it a little bit easier to kind of understand and to view. So across the bottom, we have a progression of different developmental stages from early childhood all the way through to older adulthood. On the left-hand side, we see different levels of kind of systems that really make up our society. So starting at the bottom, right? So and on an individual level, and then kind of expanding outwards, right? Moving upwards and broadening out to what actually makes up different types of cultures and policies and social norms. And then across the top, we see different examples of the types of settings that we may find risk factors in. Now, risk factors are just that. They are the things that may be present in someone's life that could put them at a higher risk, but they're by no means guarantees. So just because someone may have one or even a couple of risk factors in their life does not automatically mean that they will go on to struggle with their mental health or even go on to have thoughts of suicide. Just that if they're not given the right amount of support, or if they're not connected to the right resources, or if they can't find positive, healthy ways to manage or to cope with what they're experiencing, then it could increase their risk. So the easiest way to navigate this graph here is to start at the bottom and then draw a line to a setting at the top, right? So for example, let's go with adulthood, because I'm pretty sure we're all adults right here on this webinar for today. Since it's the middle of the day on a Wednesday, it's safe to assume that most of us may be at work or working in that capacity. So if we draw that line from adulthood straight up to work, all of the risk factors that would fall along that line would be present within that setting, right? So for example, it could be harmful alcohol use, financial insecurity, job insecurities, discrimination, social exclusion, things of that nature. So this is a quick, easy way to kind of navigate this. But I do want to take the opportunity as well to highlight the importance of protective factors. And I'm sure if we had the time on this webinar, we could probably brainstorm a chart that looks very much like this one, but have it be completely full of different types of protective factors. And what we know is that protective factors are absolutely powerful, and they often have more of an impact than all of these risk factors here. So we also know that there are certain kinds of communities and groups and populations that we want to keep our eye on. In general, we have kind of seen an overall impact on people's mental health, but there are certainly different kind of areas where would benefit from extra support, the practicing self-care and identifying coping skills as well. So this could be individuals who experience physical illnesses, Maybe they have pre-existing medical, psychiatric, or substance use challenges. Our frontline workers who have been working tirelessly over the past few years and have not kind of had a chance to pause and take a breath. We want to make sure we're checking in with them as well, because we know burnout is a very real thing. Caregivers, same thing, right? Those who are taking the time to care for their friends and loved ones. Different age groups could be at a higher risk as well. Our little ones, our youth, we know there's a youth mental health crisis that we are preparing to deal with. And other marginalized groups as well, for example, LGBTQ plus communities. So let's explore some of the different kinds of signs and symptoms that are often associated with experiences of anxiety. So we have two different categories here. On the left-hand side, we have the psychological symptoms. So these are all the things that we may kind of feel on the inside. Yeah, so excessive worry, so experiencing racing thoughts, cannot stop thinking about the things that scare them, worry them, stress them out. Maybe some agitation or irritation, irritability, maybe a sense of restlessness, right? Kind of hard to sit still, hard to pay attention, to focus, or to concentrate. There may be some sleep problems. On average, people's sleep has been impacted about 30 minutes, which is pretty significant. If you think about 30 minutes less quality sleep every single night over time, that's going to have an impact on someone's overall well-being. And then on the right-hand side, we have the physiological symptoms. So what our body kind of experiences. This could be increase in heart rate, shortness of breath, could be experiencing chest pains, maybe muscle tension, different areas of the body, experiencing dizziness or stomach pains or nausea as well. And I think we don't always highlight the physiological symptoms at times because we associate those often with medical conditions, right? And that's not too far off base for us to do, because if we think about like a rapid heartbeat, chest pain, shortness of breath, our minds jump straight to something like heart attack, right? Or it could be an allergic reaction to something, or something along those lines. And anytime we are unsure, we want to make sure that we are addressing the medical side of things before we address the mental health side of things. But it's really important for us to check in as a whole person, okay? Because sometimes for folks, anxiety and stress can present itself in physiological ways as well. Right, so we know that resiliency really does play a role, and this is kind of in people's well-being. So this is really where protective factors are the most effective, is increasing someone's sense of resiliency. So what do we actually mean by that? Because I know that word resiliency has kind of been thrown around a lot, especially over the past couple of years. So we need to be resilient as an individual, resilient as a community, to be able to move through tough life situations, right? But all we actually mean is kind of increasing our emotional strength. It's having someone feel capable of moving through tough situations or standing back up when life knocks them down. So there's a lot of ways that we can help to promote our own sense of resiliency. And that is being able to identify and utilize different types of coping skills, right, that are going to work for us in different situations and different settings. Really prioritizing self-care as much as we are able to, even if that's only 5 minutes out of your day, a couple times a day. If you can do that on a regular basis, then that's you prioritizing it. And even if that means you scheduling in your self-care, like actually putting it on the calendar, right? Sometimes we do have to kind of force ourselves to be accountable a little bit and taking care of our mental health as well. We could try to plan ahead as much as we are able to, right? Prepare for any kind of upcoming challenging situations, or if we know we have a really stressful week at work, kind of plan ahead what we are going to do or utilize to be able to cope with that kind of increased level of stress. And sometimes increasing our resiliency could be as simple as going back to the basics, like making sure we're staying hydrated, that we are eating a healthy, balanced diet to the best of our ability, that we are being physically active on a regular basis, taking breaks as needed, and getting enough sleep every night, making sure we're connecting to our support systems as well. Who do we have in our life that we kind of lean on, right, at different times, and who can we connect with? And just remember that everyone's just doing the best that they can, right? If you are making your best effort, putting your best foot forward, then that usually is good enough. And take pride in those little wins throughout your day. Like, I woke up on time today, right? Or I washed my hair today, or the kids learned something new today, right? Those are all wins. So we can take pride in those little things as well. Sometimes we refer to practicing self-care as practicing self-love. So this is an image from at Live Now, which is our Instagram page, all about self-care. So if you want to learn a little bit more about how to practice self-care, why that's important, feel free to follow us on Instagram if you are. Also on there, we have a whole bunch of other kind of social media pages that we have. I'll put all of our handles at the end of the presentation. We got a whole slide dedicated to them. But the cool thing about practicing self-care is you get to decide what works for you. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. The key, again, is just making the time for it and also making it a priority on a regular basis. So some of the different pieces that actually make up practicing self-care, a really big one is validating your emotions. Our emotions as human beings kind of pop up as they pop up. We don't have a whole lot of control over those. We feel things as we feel them, but what we do have some control over at the very least is our responses to them, okay? So what are we doing to help manage ourselves? And it's normal, right, to experience mixed emotions or even have our emotions be circular. So we can feel lost and stressed out and overwhelmed at one moment, then feel pretty okay, right? Feel pretty balanced and on top of things the next, and then go right back to feeling lost and overwhelmed like that. Yeah. And with so much that has been happening over the past couple of years, not just with the pandemic, but with the political climate of our country today, you know, negative events and incidents that we see being shared on the news or being shared on social media, it can absolutely have an impact on people's stress levels and their mental well-being. And so we have to validate how we're feeling, right? Your experiences are your experiences and they are absolutely valid. But what we can do again is find different ways for us to kind of manage and to cope and to be able to get through our day-to-day. Staying connected is super important, and I don't mean you have to be super popular like this giant friend group or social circle. As long as you have a couple solid connections in your life that you know you can turn to and lean on when you need them, then wonderful. That's great, right? That's you absolutely staying connected. Sometimes when we are trying to stay connected, we are staying too connected. And by that, we may be over checking things, right? Like the news. If we want to stay up to date, for example, we're constantly checking different news outlets because it's so easy, right? So accessible for us to get this information, and sometimes even conflicting pieces of information from different news outlets. Yeah. So if you find that kind of having a negative impact on your mental health, if you find it increasing your stress or anxiety levels, maybe consider setting a couple times out of your day to be able to check the news and get the information that you need. And that way you can focus your time and energy on other things that you need to do throughout your day as well. I sometimes compare this to monitoring my caffeine intake because I'm a huge coffee drinker. So I know that if I have too much coffee, my anxiety level starts to creep up a bit. Or if I have coffee too late in the day, then it affects my ability to fall asleep at night. So if you know, are a coffee drinker as well, you can probably relate to that. But if you find the same effects happening whenever you are checking the news or checking social media, maybe consider setting some boundaries with that or taking some breaks every once in a while too. And then creature comforts, of course, if you are lucky enough to have a pet or have access to one that you get along with, then it does wonders for promoting our overall well-being. Other ways to practice self-care is to follow a schedule. We crave routine and consistency. It helps to provide some structure throughout our day. And that also, again, means scheduling in our self-care to the best of our ability. We want to utilize social media responsibly. I know social media is one of those things we hear a lot of mixed messages about, and there can be some benefits to social media, but there's definitely some downfalls as well. Anytime we are online, we need to keep our sense of safety in mind. We need to remind ourselves that we want to remain respectful and compassionate, even when there may be differences of opinions at times. Just thinking about what we say or what we comment before we actually post it or send that message. And then check in with ourselves too, right? Do I feel better after going on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever other social media platform you may be on? If the answer is no, or I'm not sure, or I feel worse after I look at social media, then it may be a good indication that it's time to take a step back or maybe take a little bit of a break, which is absolutely an okay thing for everyone to do. We can identify different online resources and share them as well, even if it's not one that we ourselves are using. We want to get the information from resources that are out there to the wider public, right, to our communities. But we also want to make sure that we are sharing resources that come from reputable sources or reliable organizations as well. And then spending time in nature, of course, there's something to be said about getting outside and connecting with your outside environment that also really boosts our overall well-being. Now that we've talked about those kind of quote unquote normal responses to anxiety and stress, so those like psychological or physiological symptoms, we've talked about different pieces that make up practicing self-care. And so when does it become more, right? When does practicing self-care start to not have the same amount of effect as it usually does, or things start to progress and get worse? These are the things that we want to look out for. If someone's mood has been impacted for a significant amount of time, 2 weeks is usually a pretty good benchmark to do that check-in, right? If we notice that someone is kind of acting differently or has been more irritable as of late, or they're kind of withdrawing or pulling away, whatever that may be, it's a good opportunity to check in with them. And again, we're not the mental health professionals. Unless you are one and you're on this webinar, then thank you, we love you, and we need you in this world. But I'm a public health person, so, not a clinician by any means with the ability to diagnose myself or another person with a mental health challenge, but it does help to educate ourselves, right? And to increase our own awareness. And what is it that I want to look out for within myself or within other people that may be indications that they are struggling with their mental health? Another thing we want to look out for is anhedonia, it's just a fancy word for loss of interest. So the things that people used to really enjoy doing brought them happiness and joy. Satisfaction doesn't quite have that same effect. Any expression of suicidality, so thoughts of suicide, talking about it, making a plan, okay, all of those aspects should be one of the bigger warning signs for us. They're indications that we want to connect that person to help sooner rather than later. There's a lot of really awesome crisis resources that are out there. I'll make sure to highlight a couple of them at the end of the slide and make sure I send a whole list to you in that follow-up email as well. The rest of the slide, that kind of negative impact on work or school, social withdrawal, disruption in relationships or daily activities really is what reminding us to look at what kind of an impact is this having on someone's day-to-day. So is this affecting someone's ability to wake up on time, to show up on time to work, not just show up to work, but be present, be engaged, to absorb information, to be productive, to get things done? Is it starting to affect someone's ability to sleep at night, to eat regular meals? Is it affecting relationships and connections with the people around them, right? If it is, then it's a good indication that they may be struggling with their mental health, right? We want to be able to do that check-in and let them know that we are there to provide that support, but also that there's really great resources that are out there too. Here are some different kind of work warning signs that we may see or recognize within ourselves in a workplace setting or within our coworkers too, right? If we have that kind of relationship with our coworkers where we can do that check-in, then these are the things that we may want to look out for. If there's a disruption, again, in that person's ability to focus, to take breaks, they're starting to pull away or withdrawal even within a workplace setting when normally before they were pretty present and engaged, right, and communicative. Maybe they start enjoying work less, so they don't get the same kind of joy and satisfaction even within the work that they are doing. Maybe they feel bored or irritated. This says in sessions, but maybe just in general. Yeah. Like kind of during meetings, it's hard to concentrate or pay attention. Maybe someone just feels exhausted, right? Whether it's emotionally or physically. Taking note of kind of recent life stressors. I think this one is something that we can all kind of relate to, because I think historically we have really stressed keeping work and personal life separate, right? It's two different settings, two different things, and they shouldn't influence each other. You leave home at home, you leave work at work. But with the past couple of years, if we've learned anything by inviting people into our homes, right, by working remotely, is that those lines get blurred a lot, right? And we absolutely carry things from home or recent life stressors in our personal lives into our workplace settings as well. So it's important for us to just acknowledge that, yes, that sometimes can happen. But if it's starting to have an impact on our ability to get things done and be productive at work, then we want to think about maybe reaching out for that extra help and support, especially when we're starting to overlook those personal needs as well. I also think it's important for us to acknowledge grief, okay? And the role that grief can often play, right? And grief, what it is at its core is loss, right? It could be the loss, right? The death of a friend or a family member or a loved one. It could have been the loss of a relationship, could have been loss of family structure. If there's a divorce, right? Or a parent maybe who went on deployment, kind of major transitions like that. It could also have been the loss of expectations for how something was going to turn out, right? And how you hoped something was going to be turning out. So everyone has experienced loss in some form or fashion over the past couple of years. So this is really where validating our emotions and experiences is incredibly important. Again, it's okay to be feeling what you're feeling. It's also important to not cross compare your experiences with others. Right. And I've been guilty of this before as well, saying things like, well, I don't have it that bad, right? There's people out in the world who have it way worse than I ever have or hopefully ever will have. But what we're doing by saying statements like that is kind of invalidating our own experiences. Okay. Pain is pain, and we all need support surrounding that. So if you have experience grief over the past few years or in your life in general, you're on kind of your own grief journey, like I am, it is definitely a journey, but you feel like you need kind of extra help and support surrounding that, please reach out and find that help and support, because there's really great resources out there to help you kind of process and help you along in that journey as well. So I've talked a few times already about the importance of checking in, right? But how do we actually do that? So here's a good kind of guide and introductory questions and what we mean by starting to have that conversation about what may be going on. So we can either utilize these questions to check in with ourselves, or if we want to check in with someone that we care about and we've kind of noticed different causes for concern or maybe different even warning signs, like, and how do we do that outreach? How do we start that conversation? Here's a good kind of guide. So check in about things that happen from the day to day, right? How am I doing from the day to day? Am I able to get enough sleep? How is my mood throughout my day? How are my relationships? Right? How are my relationships and connections with the people around me in my social circles? Or am I even doing things to stay connected? Am I starting to withdraw, right? Or there's some kind of like isolating behaviors happening? Am I withdrawing from the important people that I have in my life? And this can also be done via social media too. I know when we talk about connections and stuff, we always think of like whatever like physical in real life connections, but sometimes on social media as well, we may start to notice that isolating and withdrawal or disengagement, especially for someone who's usually very active. Right, they're always posting on their stories, always commenting, always responding to messages, and they really start to pull away and they're not posting as much anymore or not being as engaged. And it's not just because they're taking a break from social media, which again is an okay thing for everyone to do, but you really start to notice that someone's kind of disengaging, then send them a message, right? And do that check-in there. We can also check in different settings that we are or have in our lives, like at work, right? How is work going? Or for our youth, how is school, right? How is learning going? And I think one of the more important questions to ask is, do I feel hopeful, or do you feel hopeful? Hope is so important for moving forward and for having a sense of resiliency, is having something to look forward to and to work towards. And when someone feels like there is no hope, that there's nothing to look forward to, or maybe that's hard to see in that moment, then that's what really leads to that kind of stuck feeling. Um, and so we want to do our best within ourselves to find that kind of little nugget of hope, a ball of light of hope, and make it bigger, or help someone else find that ball of light of hope in their life and help make that bigger as well. So here's a scale that helps us kind of visualize different ranges that we may find ourselves in, and also gives us an opportunity to do that check-in, right? Kind of gauge where our anxiety and stress levels are at, but also to identify the skills and tools we need to help manage when we are in a certain place. So the scale ranges from 0 to 100. It's broken up into 3 different ranges. So 0 to 40, 40 to 60, and 60 to 100. So we can utilize different things like self-care activities, coping skills, or even distress tolerance skills. And there are differences between those, even though sometimes we kind of group them together in these mental health presentations. But self-care activities are those activities that we do from our day-to-day, right? They're the things that we like doing. They make us happy. They bring us joy, satisfaction. They make us feel productive. Maybe they help us feel better, right? When we're feeling down, give us a little bit of a boost in our mood. Coping skills are what we do to start to calm down our nervous systems, right? That become activated when we do experience stress. And then distress tolerance skills are the things that we utilize when we feel overwhelmed, right? When we're experiencing those really high levels of stress and anxiety, what do we do to help calm our bodies down on a physiological level quickly? So the 0 to 40 range is the range that we are in when we feel pretty good, right? We feel pretty okay. It's only moving closer to that 40 mark when you may start to notice that I feel a little anxious, right? We have that kind of limited awareness that you may be feeling anxiety. So that 0 to 40 range is where self-care is especially effective. And when we also want to be prioritizing our self-care too, we talk about it being like investing in our mental health. And I know that word investing is typically associated with finances, but we can also associate it with self-care too, because all we're doing is investing in our emotional bank accounts, right? And so the more time on a regular basis we can make those deposits by practicing self-care, the more we'll have to pull from. And there may come a time down the road where we'll have to pull from those emotional bank accounts to support ourselves or to try to support another person, but at least we'll have a little bit to kind of pull from. The 40 to 60 range is when we are definitely aware that we are stressed out or that we are anxious. This is where we may start to feel it in our body, right? We may start to experience those physiological symptoms. So this is where we can use a combination of self-care activities and coping skills, but we want to make sure we identify specific coping skills that we can turn to in this range here. The 60 to 100 range is what we are going to highlight for the next couple of slides, since everyone's baselines and experiences of anxiety have kind of shifted upwards over the past couple of years. So normally where someone would be starting in that 0 to 40 range, and if they experience additional stress and anxiety, it pushes them up into that 40 to 60 range. A lot of folks now are starting at that 40 to 60 range. So additional stress and anxiety pushes them up into that 60 to 100 range. All right, so the first skill that we want to talk about is the importance of practicing mindfulness. And there's a lot of even pieces that make up the practice of mindfulness. One of them is being present focused. So people who struggle with anxiety, like myself, I'm totally guilty of this, is I have a hard time staying in the moment. Okay. Maybe we're stuck thinking about the past and how it's still affecting us to this day. Maybe we're stuck worrying about the future, right? And trying to predict things that we have no control over, right? Or the possibility to predict, and we're trying to prepare for it, right? And if we're stuck in the past or we're kind of worrying about the future, then we're really spending energy on things that cannot be changed, or things that we don't have control over. I mean, yeah, we can plan ahead to a certain extent to kind of alleviate some of that anxiety that we may have, but it's not always foolproof, right? There are things that pop up that we could have never imagined could happen. So we also have to be flexible, right? And learn when to practice radical acceptance, which is the next piece there, is a way to practice mindfulness. And radical acceptance kind of is what it is. If it's something that I can change, then I'll change it. But if I can't change it, I have to do my best to accept that that thing is unchangeable and try to move forward and focus on other things. And I know it's really easy for me to summarize that in the nice little package. And it's a completely different thing to actually practice that, right? For some of us, it's a daily practice. For some of us, it may take the help of a mental health professional to really grasp that concept, right? Of focusing on the things that we do have control over. And I would like to note with that radical acceptance piece is that acceptance doesn't have to be agreement. Okay, accepting that something painful happened, and moving forward is not the same thing as saying it's okay that that painful thing happened, but rather that I'm taking the energy from denying that it happened or ruminating over it and putting it towards healing from it, right? And trying to move forward. But again, it's super easy for me to summarize that, but entirely different thing to actually practice it. But it can be a way for us to stay present focused and to practice mindfulness as well. We can utilize meditation and prayer too, to be mindful, whether that's within an organized religious setting or outside of organized religion. And meditation, it takes some practice in and of itself. So if you're not kind of familiar, you don't have a lot of experience with meditation, don't feel like you have to jump into a full 30-minute meditation session, because it's actually really hard to only focus on one thought at a time or one thing at a time. So start small, right? Do those baby steps. Maybe you can find a 4-minute meditation, like the videos you can find on our YouTube channel, right? 4-minute meditation videos, and really just start there and kind of build your way up from there. We also want to do our best to focus on one task at a time instead of multitasking. I know that's really, really hard, and I always laugh a little bit when I bring this one up, because like every meeting and every setting I move into, I always hear people like, oh, look at all these hats that I wear. Like, look at all these things that I'm juggling, all these things I'm doing at the same time, all these connections I'm making, right, at multiple times. And even when we feel like we're really good at multitasking, what we're doing is splitting our attention, right? And that's going to open up the room for mistakes to happen, or for things to get missed, or for things to fall through the cracks. So as much as we are able to with our busy lives and with our busy schedules, multitasking sometimes is unavoidable. We want to do our best to focus on one thing at a time. We can also be mindful in how we connect with each other too, right? So when we are making connections, we want to be accessible, we want to be responsive, engaged, really be that overall kind of a good listener. And, listening seems easy, it seems pretty simple, but it's more than just sitting there and letting someone talk at you, right? I have so much patience, I could probably sit there and let someone talk at me for hours, but that's not what we mean by really listening to someone, right? It takes a little bit of work. Sometimes it's allowing space for that conversation to happen, right? Kind of getting comfortable with those uncomfortable silent moments. Sometimes it's asking questions to make sure we're understanding that other person correctly. Or maybe it's nonverbal language, communication styles, right? What's someone's body language like? Are they visibly upset? What is our body language like? What kind of message am I sending to another person, right? And there's other coping skills that are out there. I know we spent some time just kind of unpacking mindfulness, but there's deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, autogenic training, grounding exercises, even aromatherapy. You can find recordings of these coping skills on our YouTube channel, but there's a lot of really great ways to learn all of these. So I encourage you to explore the different ones, really find the ones that are going to work for you. Different distress tolerance skills. This could be, intensive exercise. Maybe it's paced breathing. So similar to like kind of diaphragmatic breathing, but in a more paced pattern. It could be the dive response, maybe adjusting our body temperature. It's, finding those grounding exercise to kind of check in with our senses and bring us back to the present. Or it could be something like paired muscle relaxation. So these distress tolerance skills are really the ones we want to utilize when we are in that 60 to 100 range, right? When we're feeling overwhelmed, we really need to ground ourselves. And yeah, we may start to take a couple deep breaths, right, with diaphragmatic breathing, but it may not be effective right away, or we find that it may not always be working when we are in that space. So we need to also identify these skills that are going to help calm our bodies down. So one of our favorite skills to pass along in this category is actually the dive response. So we have a gland inside of our nose that prevents us from breathing in air when we're underwater. And I'm sure some of you are like, well, Amanda, I don't breathe when I'm underwater because I hold my breath, right? And you're not wrong. But even when we're unexpectedly submerged, right? Someone pushes us into a pool or that wave catches us off guard, right? And we're underwater, our body automatically recognizes that I'm not in a place right now that I can breathe. So what's going to happen is our bodies are going to try to hold as much oxygen intrinsically or inside as possible until we have the opportunity to take a breath again. So as a result of that process being activated, what happens is our heart rate slows down, our blood pressure lowers, our circulation slows down as well. Again, just trying to keep as much oxygen inside. So it's almost like a trap door into our nervous system, a really quick and easy way to calm our bodies down when we are feeling overwhelmed. Now, I know that we can't always jump into a pool or jump into the ocean when we feel overwhelmed, but we can get creative with this. So if you lay a cold, wet rag over this portion of your face, that'll activate the dive response. Or if you get a bowl of cold water, just stick your face in it, hold your breath for about 10 seconds. That'll also activate the dive response as well. Support plans are also important for us to have. I know sometimes we think of support plans as for someone being in a crisis, right? But I think it's important for everyone to have some kind of a support plan in place or have some idea of what their support plan is. So think about who is it that you know you can go to when you need someone to talk to, right? When you're going through a tough time, who do you turn to? Who do you lean on? Also think about those people that just make you feel better after interacting with them, right? Who's that friend that finds the funniest memes or TikTok videos, okay? Or has the funniest stories, okay? You just can't believe that they had those experiences in their life and they just make you laugh, right? So much. And you just feel better after interacting with them. Identify who those people are too. We have different types of connections in our lives that we can rely on at different times. If you have providers in your life, make sure you have their contact information on hand. And this also includes different types of crisis resources as well. I always encourage people to program those numbers into your contacts, right? Put them right into your devices. Just in case you ever have to contact one of them or call one of them or text one of them, you won't be searching Google, right, for the right one. You'll already have them programmed in. And then sometimes we as adults also have to ask those bigger questions in life, right? We always talk about helping youth kind of expand their worldview and explore different facets of their identity. But I think it's important for us as adults to do that from time to time as well. So think about what gives your life meaning. Those bigger questions like, who am I, right? What kind of person do I want to be? How am I treating the people that I have in my life? Right? When I am stressed or anxious or going through a hard time, what makes me feel better, right? How do I cope? And kind of putting together that well-rounded support plan. So crisis resources, there's a lot of really wonderful ones that are out there. We have the National Suicide and Crisis Line 988, which was formerly the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but instead of that really long 1-800-273-TALK number, they just made it a whole lot easier for us by shortening it down to 988. We also have the Hawaii Cares number. So if you're calling 988 from an 808 area code, it's going to redirect you automatically to the Hawaii Cares, because that's kind of our local crisis center and crisis line. They've expanded their services as well. So anyone really who's looking for mental health services or substance use services in general can also call Hawaii Cares, but they do still offer those 24/7 intervention services. We also want to be aware of other kind of resources that are out there, especially surrounding child abuse, child trafficking, or domestic violence, intimate partner violence, right? We know that a lot more time was spent at home over the past few years. Not every home is a safe space. So we want to make sure we're aware of these different types of resources. And again, I'll send you all of these slides and these lists of resources as well. If you're a more kind of device and techie person, there's a lot of really great apps that are out there that help you, whether it's track your sleep or check in with your sleep hygiene, like CBTI, or maybe it's something that helps you track your mood and put together kind of a support plan and find different kind of coping skills that are going to work, like COVID Coach, right? There's a lot of really awesome apps that are out there, usually pretty much free to download. But get out there, right? Explore and find the ones that are going to work for you and help you support your overall well-being. You can also connect with us for additional resources. If you go to our website, mentalhealthhawaii.org, you'll see that Get Connected banner page right off the bat at the top. If you click on that, it'll direct you to connect with additional online resources that we've been compiling. It even connects you with fun activities and printable information, right? So maybe resources you want to print out and share with others. There's coloring pages on there. There's things like mindfulness bingo. If you want to gamify self-care, there's ways to be able to do that. And I mentioned before as well, we're all over social media. So if you are too, here are all of our handles on Facebook. We run a couple different groups like Busy Bees, activities for our little ones, monthly book club, right? Recommendations, things of that nature. We got a couple pages on Instagram at Live Now, again, our self-care page. MHA Hawaii is our general one. We're on TikTok, Twitter, and then YouTube is where we house all of the previous recordings of our trainings and presentations. It's also where you can find those 4-minute mindfulness meditation videos and other different coping skill videos as well. And then last but certainly not least, here is our kind of contact information. We got our website. Our Oahu address is on there. We also have phone numbers for both our Oahu and Maui offices. Okay, and you will have my email. You should have already received it when I sent you the reminder for today's webinar earlier today, but you'll have it again when I send that follow-up. But please feel free to reach out if we can help you identify any kind of resources, or if you have questions, we'd be happy to point you in the right direction. That QR code on the bottom left-hand side of that slide will take you to free online screening tools, which is another really great way to check in with ourselves, right? There's a whole bunch of different types of screenings that are on there to have to do with depression, with anxiety, substance use, psychosis. There's even a youth test on there. And again, it's not meant for us to diagnose ourselves by any means, but it's a good starting point to try to find out more information. It's free and anonymous. You can take it as many times as you feel like taking it, and it does give you your results at the end. But that's pretty much all the information that we have for you today. So I will open it up to any questions that folks may have. Let me take a peek at the Q&A feature just in case anyone dropped anything into there. I'm not seeing anything. Not seeing anything come through the chat yet. Okay. But if you do have questions, feel free to drop your question in there, the chat or Q&A. I'd be happy to answer. But if you are one of those who need to digest information a little bit, and questions pop up in the middle of the night and wake you up, or you think of questions when you're taking a shower and you're like, oh, I wish I had asked that earlier. That's okay. Again, feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer any questions if we are able to. We are coming up just about 12 minutes before the top of the hour. So I'm happy to give you about 10 minutes back to your lunch hour. But before we sign off and say goodbye to each other, I just dropped a link in the chat. If you don't mind giving some feedback, your feedback is incredibly valuable to us. We want to make sure that the information we provide to all of you is helpful and is relevant and are things that you want to learn about. Because if it's not, then we want to change that. But we don't necessarily know that unless we ask you. So if you have a chance to fill out that evaluation, we would be incredibly grateful, eternally grateful. And I'm still not seeing any questions really pop through in the chat. So thank you, everyone, for showing up today, spending your lunch hour with me, Brian Talisayan, the Executive Director of South America of Hawaii. I'm just kidding. Right? Again, Amanda, I hope Brian watches this recording at the end so he can see that. But again, feel free to reach out if you have questions, looking for resources. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much, everyone.